Hello everyone. Hello and welcome. It's episode 75 of The Insurgents.
That many, huh?
Yeah. 76, actually.
These guys need to take a break.
Yeah. I didn't even get that right. It said number 76.
Oh,
pretty
that
incredible.
many, huh?
Yeah. Take that again. We're going to delete all this stuff. You might notice that we took a week off of our wacky intros. It just felt like there's a little too much serious stuff going on that I didn't think anyone was really tuning in this week to hear us like joke around about being liberal think tank weirdos. I hope you don't mind. I'm sure everyone's really like disappointed. I know that's what everyone listens to the show for, us doing our weekly sort of like improv segment, improv comedy.
Yeah, well, we'll see who's laughing when Upright Citizens Brigade calls us.
Yeah. That's been my long game all along.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really mind so much about the news and politics stuff. That's just a means to an end.
Just becoming an improv everywhere type of guy. I'm gonna do
exactly.
My underwear metro ride because that's funny.
Yes, really, really great stuff on the horizon. Watch this space.
Zany stuff from those guys.
We are bringing back this week Arash Azzizada, who appeared on the show a few months ago when Biden announced that they were going ahead with this Afghanistan withdrawal. Obviously, there has been a ton of movement on this over the last couple of weeks since this really started to like materialize into a real thing. Culminating today in this really horrific attack in the Kabul airport. So it's a really like emotional time for, I think, Afghans everywhere, for Arash in particular, who's been writing op-eds and appearing on all kinds of different podcasts and doing all kinds of media lately. So we really appreciated he was able to come back this week and offer his perspective about the really tumultuous events of the last couple of weeks as the United States has gone ahead with this withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Yeah, he's great. In the show notes, you'll find a link to the petition that Afghans for a Better Tomorrow did with Move On. It has well over 100,000 signatures. You'll also find a link to Arash's op-ed and just links to their social accounts. Support them however best you can. At the end of the episode, he gives you more details on how you can better support them in their work. So please plug in if you can. It shouldn't fall to grassroots organizers to do this kind of evacuation work. Like that's how sad. That's how sad the state of affairs are right now. So please support them in their work.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's going to be coming on in just a little bit. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we talk to Arash?
I see another nemesis of Rob Rousseau's has fallen.
Yes. One of my many enemies, one of the many haters and losers that has tried to come after me through the years. Owen Schroyer of InfoWars.
Yeah. Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Owen Schroyer.
Yeah. And he's being silenced, and I'm actually taking his side now. He's being silenced for the small crime of doing journalism.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. He surrendered himself to authorities, I believe, for his role in the January 6th Capitol riot. I didn't actually investigate it this much, but did he actually like breach the Capitol? I know Alex Jones was there, and InfoWars had a presence there. I feel like Alex Jones had the good sense to only rile people up to go into the Capitol without actually doing it himself.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, they're all cowards. You know what? Baked Alaska, I think, actually went inside.
Yeah, I remember I was watching his live stream the day of. He was live streaming from there with his like feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk and stuff. I don't know if there's really great OPSEC there, if that's the word. No, but I guess Owen as well played some role. And he's now surrendered himself to the authorities. And that just goes to show you that when you do come after me, you go on a list.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately for Owen, he found out that bad things happen to you when you show up on this list. And I did what had to be done.
Rob's
and we just leave it at that. We can just leave it at that. We don't need to fill in the blanks. No need to get into specifics. But this is what happens. This is what happens when you cross me, Owen. Word of warning to any other jokers out there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're on notice. All of you are on notice.
Yeah, absolutely. Every listener on this show, they need to know what they're dealing with here. When they send in these rude reviews, leave comments online, make fun of me for being Canadian, any of this stuff.
They have a point there.
This is all list-worthy. This is all list-worthy behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to read between the lines here. No, but shout out to Owen. That's pretty unfortunate for him.
Uh-huh.
My prayers are with him in this difficult time.
That sucks, bro.
Yeah. I mean, it was just like it was hilarious to watch that clip of when he did talk about me on InfoWars. My very, very clearly, obviously not serious tweet about literally, I wrote in the tweet, voting illegally, and just like, to me, it's like, could not be more clear that this is not a real thing. That was kind of part of my whole obsession with riling up these weird conservative media people. Just seeing the extent to which they'll ignore all signs that like there's not anything nefarious going on, and it is in fact just like an annoying guy online just making stuff up. All the signs were there for Owen, but he still felt the need to go on InfoWars and talk about apparently me leading some kind of Canadian voting caravan to Texas to vote for Beto O'Rourke in the 2018 midterms, and then just logging on to my verified Twitter account and being like, and just openly discussing this illegal actions. Apparently, I'm making fun of it, but apparently, like, this is a thing that actually happens, judging from Owen's own personal situation right now. That's one thing I know that you don't do when you're committing serious crimes like that, is you don't go online and brag about doing it. But I guess some of these guys do have trouble with this.
Yeah.
So that's too bad.
Well, everyone's got their faults.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll be fine.
Please play the clip at some point in this because it's just so funny.
This is some guy, Rob Rousseau, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
I think the only thing that's better than the actual clip is his fumbling over the printout of your tweets.
He printed out the tweets. Yeah. And had a hard time keeping his hands on it. It's really strange.
So how about this? And he whips out the paper and it almost shoots off the desk. Yo, get a load of this.
Yeah. No, I know. It's extremely ridiculous. Good. Anyway, I'm sure Alex Jones is going to talk to his CIA contacts, and he'll be getting out in no time. So no problem. The other thing that I wanted to talk about briefly, just because I know you really enjoy playing the video game Fortnite. Not me. I'm a responsible adult. When I have free time, I mostly just spend that time reading about hostory and political theory and these kind of very serious things.
Dictionary.
Yeah. Just reading the dictionary is one thing that I often do. You, however, are really into this world of Fortnite, which is fine. And I saw that they were, speaking of history, Fortnite now is doing some online event where you can log on and, do the Gangnam Style dance around an MLK exhibit in the online world of Fortnite. That's interesting.
That's right, Rob. Yeah, the focus is they specifically want you to go do Gangnam Style at Martin Luther King's March on Washington.
Yeah.
That, I think, is what they wanted out of this event. But no,
who could have predicted that would be the result, though? It's crazy.
This is why they should... The one thing I was most curious about was whether or not they were going to disable emotes, because in the past, in a much less serious event, they've had emotes where people would make noise during a concert, and then the emote noise would overshadow the music, which was weird. So I was wondering what they were going to do with this. I went in this morning just to poke around, and I'm going to actually spend more time on it later tonight after Deep Dive, just to see what the full thing is. There's a bunch of different breakouts, digital museums and stuff, which I think is going to be fascinating. But I wanted to see what you were able to do, and they did actually disable some of the emotes, and some of the emotes that could be more toxic. So there's a really obnoxious laugh emote that's kind of like informally referenced as the donkey laugh, where you do this like barrel laugh and you make this horrible bang noise. They disabled that one completely. If you own it, you can't even use it. There are other ones like the Renegade, that Gene Park of the Washington Post said that Renegade is impermissible and not allowed to be used during this event. So I don't know exactly what went into it, but you can't use some.
You can't
of these.
do the L dance.
I would imagine that one is also disabled.
Yeah, that would be not good. Yeah, it's very strange. I mean, I can sort of understand using this world of Fortnite to do concerts. There was like, what is it, the Travis
Scott had a concert
Travis
last
Scott,
year.
yeah, the Travis Scott concert. I remember we joked around about projecting Biden over the Grand Canyon.
No, that wasn't a joke. That was something that his campaign wanted to do.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
fuck.
yeah.
I thought we made that up as one of our bits that we were doing.
No. It was something that we would joke about, but that's something they actually wanted to do. When they saw Travis Scott in Fortnite, there was like a report that came out that their digital strategists were like, how do we project Joe Biden over the Grand Canyon? That's what they wanted to do.
I see. Okay,
yeah.
I think I'd blocked that from my memory somehow. Yeah, it seems kind of interesting, this idea of using that world for these kinds of events. I think this is maybe, I would stack this up as a bad example of doing something like that. Mm-hmm. And it kind of reminds me of something that someone once wrote. I can't remember who wrote this, talking about like revolutionary figures who get ignored by the establishment while they're alive, and then after their death, their whole revolutionary message gets watered down, and all this stuff gets robbed, and they become these kind of harmless icons. I'm trying to remember who that was, but I can't. It's not coming to me. But thinking about that today, I mean, it's certainly an interesting concept that I was reminded of today watching some of the clips of the Fortnite MLK exhibit.
I think it's fine though. Like it's okay. It's cringy for sure. It's made worse by people being able to do the Gangnam Style like I did on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. This was I was doing it for science, so I was being respectful.
Yeah, I mean, you have to check. Verify.
Yeah, I really just wanted to see what you were allowed to do and what you weren't allowed to do, and then I'll go back in later to see the whole thing. But the Biden campaign actually did do their own creative island during the campaign. And you had to do a variety of different mini games and exercises to complete it. And one was, there's like picking up trash out of some creek or river or whatever. Another one was finding Kamala's sneakers, because they really wanted you to think she was cool because she wore sneakers one time. And then
the Timbs. Let's not forget about that. This is Tim
Erasure. Yeah, she's rocking Timbs.
Yeah.
And then my favorite exercise in that little mini world was cranking 90s to build an HBCU. And if you're unfamiliar with Fortnite lingo, that means you're building as fast as you can in a vertical tower, basically. You're building walls and floors in rapid succession. This is a strategy that people who are really good at the game use to build up a tower that's pretty high and inaccessible by an enemy. And they call it cranking 90s. So they wanted you to crank 90s to build an HBCU. And I thought that was a really odd thing to include.
Yes, it was. Oh boy. Very strange. It was very strange images coming out of the Fortnite world today, which again, I have no involvement with, but just peripherally I was paying attention to this.
Gotcha. Yeah. Friends were playing and you just saw the memes.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get to our talk with Arash Azzizada. Again, it's really informative and helpful to be able to get his perspective on this as an Afghan who lives in the Afghan diaspora. Away from the relentless assault of the corporate media. Voices like Arash's have been completely ignored throughout the last couple of weeks, very deliberately, I think. And it's been kind of had a very chilling effect if you witness the way that the mainstream media in the West has sort of availed itself over the last couple of weeks. So I was really happy we were able to get him come on the show and give his perspective. He is going to be joining the show right after this.
We're joined by Arash Arash Azzizada from Afghans for a Better Tomorrow. And you might all remember him from an episode we did a few months ago where we talked about the U.S. pullout in Afghanistan and what that might look like. And now Arash is joining us again to do a retrospective. What do we get right? What do we get wrong? And a look ahead as the fallout from the U.S. withdrawal in Afghanistan has created a vacuum for the Taliban to take control. And now we're seeing just today on Thursday attacks at the airport. Arash, it's been quite a couple weeks for you, I know.
Yeah.
How are you holding up?
That's actually a good question. And I would say I'm not holding up. I think we can be honest. And I'm probably like a shattered person, and I'm broken as a human being, and so is everyone else in my family and in our community. And that also like pales to comparison to the folks in Afghanistan. But I also don't have time to really think about my feelings and process, because I've been kind of just like doing nonstop triage and rapid response in terms of the situation back home on like an organizational level in advocacy stuff, but also like on a personal level where I'm like, hey, these are people I care about, and people that are in like harm's way right now, and trying to work to ensure that they somehow get evacuated. And I've seen better days, unfortunately, but it's good to talk to you guys, and credit to both of you for being one of the very, very, very few people this is not the first conversation we're having, but everyone else is talking to me. It's our first, so appreciate being back on,
Yeah, of course. This morning, there were these really horrific bombings now at the Kabul airport. I mean, so much has happened since the last time we spoke. And we talked about when the withdrawal was announced, and we were wondering whether that timeline was going to hold. We talked about, I remember, whether the war was really like coming to an end, or whether it was just being privatized, whether there were going to be, contractors left over, what the situation was going to be. I guess because like before we talk about the attacks that happened this morning, I guess my question for you, Arash, is are you surprised at the speed with which the Taliban was able to take control of the country with the U.S. leaving? I mean, it seems like it caught a lot of people in the United States government off guard, or they were at least cagey about the prospects of this happening. Has it been surprising to you, the speed with which this has all happened over the last like week or two?
Yeah, I think it is. As much as I would like to say, hey, like, because there's some items I go back to specifically we published. I talked to you guys, and I published a piece in Newsweek roughly 3 to 4 months ago. I think it was May, when we launched our Afghans for a Better Tomorrow campaign in anticipation of the withdrawal, and shortly after President Biden's announcement. And despite all that, I think, and feeling kind of like, some of the things I kind of saw coming in a way, but I think at the progression at which it happened and how rapidly everything deteriorated, I think is kind of like has been shell shocking in a way, to see essentially 20 years, and we can like dive into what went wrong the past 20 years. But people had dreams and aspirations and businesses and platforms, and those things kind of evaporated pretty much overnight. To see it dissolve, essentially, or to watch it quite literally get kicked out in a sense, that was, I think, shocking. We saw all these major cities fall, and then Kabul, and it all became kind of inevitable in a sense. That was, I think, emotionally hard to process, and I'm not sure even I've since the last time we spoke, we've seen the entire country collapse. We are now watching a country that is essentially under sanction, because the Taliban are sanctioned under both the U.S. Treasury as well as the United Nations. An authoritarian and repressive rule. Thousands of people that have been evacuated. Civil society that has a lot of which has emptied out. It's been a very, very quick and drastic, and I would kind of compare, this is the last time I felt like this was November of 2016. This possibly being worse in many ways, obviously. But it's that kind of shell shock if people want to like try to make a comparison. Yeah, I'm not sure I have fully processed the past 2 weeks.
So we're seeing, heartbreaking images and stories out of Afghanistan. We're hearing about people possibly being stranded, and we're seeing photos of empty planes leaving, or sparsely filled planes leaving. And, there's a bipartisan segment in Congress demanding better. But what strikes me as inauthentic, of course, is, there's a cadre of Republicans who are saying, like, this is so heartbreaking what's happening. Biden needs to resign, and they're also simultaneously arguing for a continued presence in Afghanistan, and many of them are opposing any withdrawal whatsoever. They want a permanent presence in Afghanistan. How do you feel when you see Republicans kind of use this moment that to you is your friends and family suffering? To you, your heart is breaking, you're exhausted, and then you see war hawks trying to glom onto this moment, acting like they too sympathize, but ultimately they just want a continued militaristic presence there.
Can I curse on this podcast?
Please
Go for
do.
it.
Yeah, of course.
I would say fuck them. Like they can drop dead. And I hope I hope your audience is not that wide, but fuck them. Like that's how I feel.
It's okay.
And
we tell it like it is here, and sometimes it comes down to that.
Yeah, I'm
no punches.
also doing some congressional advocacy to save some lives, but like fuck them, that's how I truly feel, because they don't give a shit about Afghan people, and they're using it as a talking point to kind of go after the Biden administration. And like, let me preface this by saying this is a bipartisan failure, right? And continued conflict is exactly what we don't want. We don't want continued drone strikes. We don't want continued CIA engagement within the country. We don't want so-called quote unquote over the horizon military capabilities. We don't want cruise missiles. We don't want any of that. That we've been doing that for 20 years, if not longer, actually. I've been talking a lot about the history of Afghanistan. Clinton lobbed cruise missiles in '98, and it's just failure after failure of U.S. military engagement, and we need to really pivot to other types of positive engagement, and we can kind of discuss that later. But when I see the right and the conservatives kind of use this as an opportunity to bash Biden, I will say, the Biden administration does own this failure, but the withdrawal failure is an extension of the occupation failure. And the occupation failure is a failure of the war on terror. And the war on terror is a failure of our domestic politics. And our domestic politics can also trace back to what the U.S. did to black and brown bodies back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. In the 90s, folks pretended that Afghanistan didn't exist, and in the 80s we were used as a proxy force, and so when I see folks kind of use us as a political, they're using my friends and my family and the families of my friends and people, amazing, brave, courageous people who are sitting on a tarmac being fed pork, by the way, by the U.S. military, we're being used as cheap scoring points, and that's what this is not what this is about. And I'm a leftist and progressive, and I would also say I'm deeply disappointed by the institution that is the United States government, and also deeply disappointed and very critical of the Biden administration. And at the same time, right now, although my ideology doesn't matter and my affiliation doesn't matter, I'm an abolitionist, I would like to see the police be abolished and certain institutions be abolished. But today and this week in this moment, whoever can help me save the lives of the people that are dear and close to me is what's important. And on that ground, every single politician and policymaker has failed me.
Yeah, I wanted to point out too, because obviously it's grotesque, this conservative reaction, especially among these kind of so-called populist conservatives like Josh Hawley, who have used rhetoric about the forever wars and have kind of pretended to be against these endless occupations, who are now immediately, calling for blood in the wake of these latest attacks. But I wanted to point out, it's not even about conservatives or the political establishment. There's a lot of liberals that have really, it's been a mask-off moment for a lot of liberals, especially in the media, over the last couple of weeks. So there's been this kind of 2-week, very bizarre freakout by these sort of liberal media establishment people in the New York Times and on CNN and in mainstream media, who have not been talking about this conflict at all for the last several years and have completely ignored all of the human rights disasters that have unfolded in this region as a result of this occupation over the last, 5 years, but over the last 20 years overall, who now all of a sudden are in overdrive, kind of manufacturing this narrative about Biden abandoning people and what are we going to do about these human rights, the human rights issues and the rights of women. And it seems very, very ugly to me, the way that some of these people have immediately shifted and started promoting this narrative after really ignoring the entire occupation, ignoring all the human rights atrocities that have been occurring for years. All of a sudden have kind of made this their cause as this withdrawal has happened, because, the empire is now embarrassed. The troops are being embarrassed. And these people seem to take this personally in a certain extent. And it's been very ugly to see this unfold.
Yeah, I've seen a variety of things. And I think I had dinner with a friend yesterday, which was the first time that I left my house and try to not spend every waking moment to facilitate some type of advocacy or evacuation or coordination effort. And she looked at me and she said, oh, people are hitting me up, on a personal level. She said, people are hitting me up and they're like, do you want to talk about Afghanistan? And she responds to them, you can talk about Afghanistan as much as you've mentioned it to me in the past 20 years, which is never, now all of a sudden people are interested. So that's a good rule of thumb to have. I was like, if you haven't pretended to care, and if you're not entering this conversation, owning, and holding a mirror to yourself saying, hey, I actually fail to care about this issue, because I think for many also it's a complex issue, right? It's on one side is brown people and then the other side it's brown people, in the current conflict. So I think people are kind of confused by it if you don't delve into it and if you don't read up on it and if you don't center Afghan voices. And that's at the core of what's going on in mainstream media right now. It still is trying to fill airtime, or it's pages, and it's advocating for. So there was two specific pieces that I saw. One of them was Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who writes in the New York Times op-ed. And there's two prominent individuals who were published in the New York Times. One of them is me, and the other one is Ambassador Ryan Crocker. But the ambassador kind of talks about, this we should have just kept this occupation going. It was a quote unquote affordable status quo. An affordable status quo that was killing 10,000 civilians, Afghan civilians every year for the past 20 years, and a conflict that was starting to kill more Afghans at the start of the Doha Accords because the Taliban agreed to not kill Americans. And so Ryan Crocker talks about, it just talks about Afghan lives in this dismissive way. It doesn't acknowledge them. It doesn't center them. And it's so painful to hear that. And by the way, the 10,000 number doesn't include the Taliban members that are dying, as well as the Afghan defense forces. We're talking about a number that's between 17 to 25,000 people a year for the past 20 years. And we can go back. Actually, this conflict has raged for 43 years. And with the U.S. either engaged or disengaged and being responsible for that. And so, when I've also seen these Twitter threads and everybody continues to elevate these white male voices in a way that it's just try to reach out to an Afghan voice and see what it feels like for them. This is now impacting millions and millions of Afghan lives. 38 million people. And the mainstream media kind of has continued to fail at their job, which is not surprising, but nonetheless very disappointing.
Yeah, well, what you're pointing out is really true. This narrative, again, the way that people have described this conflict and the need to just indefinitely continue this occupation because it's so low cost. And you see, no American has been killed for the last several years. You've seen a lot of conservatives kind of take this line, no American was killed under Trump. While, like you said, completely ignoring the Afghan lives that have been lost during this period. And even, you mentioned the Afghan forces as well. That was one thing with Biden where, credit to Biden for the fact that he's continued this withdrawal despite the sort of potential political consequences for it, and we can get into that later. But it was also a little bit gross, I think, how he kind of essentially said that the people in Afghanistan were were cowards somehow, or were not willing to defend the country, as if that's not what they've been doing for the last several decades at great cost. And you saw another example of this today with this terrorist attack at Kabul airport. A lot of the reporting, we're hearing about the American servicemen were killed, but once again, the dozens of civilians that were killed in this attack just don't get mentioned often in these these dispatches?
Yeah, I think, I got a kind of like nasty email, which I'm not very visible until maybe the past few days. And I got this like nasty email and basically said, Afghans are cowards. My father fought in the Korean War and you guys should have fought. And my answer to that is, we've been fighting in some capacity or in some shape for the past like 43 years. And to give it context, I'm 33. Like this war, this conflict is roughly like 9 to 10 years, if not older than me. And that's how long the Afghan people have not seen some kind of peace, some kind of sovereignty, right? Like any kind of stability. The Afghan people are the biggest refugee population in the world, like nobody even comes close. Like in the past few years, we've seen maybe Syrians kind of join us in that regard, which is like really sad and disheartening and depressing. But this is the situation that Afghans have found themselves in. And to like say that, these Afghans didn't fight and they just gave up. It's like, well, yeah, you know what? Like, I kind of have an understanding for it. Not only is there 42 years of conflict, but why die for an unworthy cause? Because in the end, what the United States and coalition forces did was to enrich, to prop up all these like institutions, which it was a house of cards, and they all just dissolved overnight, because that's what happened when you build a deck of cards. It only takes one little ting and it falls apart, right? And whether we're talking about government institutions or like the anti-corruption institutions that they try to build, the banks, like even the media to some degree, they were all in the end propped up by the West. And when you build things that are under occupation, right? This is like, to be under occupation is to be under duress, even if you finesse it in a way that looks like people have agency. In the past 20 years, there was this article about how the NGO sector in a place like Kabul has been actually very harmful. It noted that in the past 20 years, there was no student movement, there was no grassroots movement that protested the American occupation or coalition occupation anyway. Why? Because all these NGOs are attached to these Afghan activists in a way that kind of, why would you criticize the people that are funding your arts program or your schooling or providing scholarships, right? Like it's this like implicit neo-colonial way of trying to control the Afghan people. And then this is what we see. This is the end result of that, right? Like the Taliban saw these fractures. They saw how fragile this was, and they took advantage of it. And we haven't not even discussed the fact that like the US's exit is not just the Biden administration's exit. Specifically, it started during the Obama administration and sped up really under the Trump administration. But the US essentially cut a deal with the Taliban, emboldened it, strengthened it, gave them diplomatic legitimacy through the Doha courts and otherwise. Spent a year and a half not bombing the Taliban, right, which was allowed them to resupply and basically gain strength. That was the biggest threat to the Taliban. It was the fact that they don't have an air force, and essentially the Afghans and the US do. They have strike capabilities from the air, and so they were able to gather strength. And that's really, I think, is like part of the equation that folks are missing. The withdrawal meant emboldening the Taliban. Like, in the U.S. cut a deal in order to save the lives of American troops and to not put them in harm's way, but instead who had to fight, who endured, who were on the front lines. It was not just Afghan members of our national security forces, but also just Afghan civilians.
That's a line we saw from Biden in his press conference too, right? It was look, we thought the Afghan military would have I can't remember what word he used, but basically said they didn't have like the spine to fight. He said they didn't have the backbone, whatever, and put a share of the blame on the Afghan military. And you look at that, and you look at comments that we're seeing today from people like Todd Starnes, right, who says that for every one member of the military, or one American that dies, an entire village or city in Afghanistan should be razed and just obliterated, which is just a purely genocidal statement. And I think it's rooted in a
psycho shit.
Yeah, it's rooted in this idea that people around the world just aren't fully human. It's like a level of jingoism that we see play out in our foreign policy all the time. It's disgusting, but it's pretty common. It's like a pretty common mindset on the right. So you have that, and then on the other side, like there's just like this hysterical coverage from the corporate media where they're propping up like defense contractors and former defense officials who aren't even disclosing their ties to the military or defense contractors, and they're egging on like a permanent occupation or a re-engagement.
It really can't be stressed enough, like how one-sided this media campaign has been.
It's absurd.
There's been no voices, no countering voices to this narrative. No one saying, "Look, well, Biden's doing the right thing," and everyone expected that it was going to be like no nuance whatsoever. It's been 100% every single day on cable news for the last 2 weeks, fear mongering about this and talking about what's going to happen to human rights, and we need to extend the occupation. It's been really relentless. Like, it's been really kind of eerie to watch this play out, especially from a press that's been pretty compliant when it comes to the Biden administration and pretty willing to sort of rubber stamp his agenda and kind of present him as being, the adults are back in charge. The bad orange man is gone, have just flipped on a dime overnight. And it's been this nonstop campaign over this. It's been really, really bizarre.
Yeah, I would like to make a comment about Todd Barnes. There's currently charter flights going into Kabul. I would not be opposed if he were to be on one. And
exactly. I nominate Todd as well. We can just catapult Todd into the Hindu Kush, I think, and we can get him to resolve this situation.
I think we can build a broad coalition movement that could be one of the things that we can that might be a bipartisan. That can be one of our asks. In terms,
but also on that part too, really quick, Michael Hayden even tried to use that though, but said like, "Oh yeah, we should send unvaccinated MAGA people to Afghanistan." It's like, sure, go infect people who definitely don't have the same access to medicine or vaccines as you do. Like that's like the liberal response is just let's send MAGA people over there.
It's been really a mask off moment for a lot of people, I feel like, and revealing what their true feelings are about these conflicts and about these other cultures.
It's the cheap disregard for Afghan life because it's so far away, right? Like, even for me, I grew up in the West. Even for me, it's easy to have like some naive views about what the situation is there, and like it requires like a level of like understanding and nuance and probably patience, and also just like humility. And that's I think that's one of the things that people here in America lack in this very moment, specifically the media. And I would like also say, like, and it's been a mask off for everyone, right? And like in this moment where I am like looking for people to align with me and tap into a deeper moment of consciousness, where I say, hey guys, like, this is a crisis moment, and this is the biggest, like, the past 10 days have been the biggest crisis moment, both in my personal life, but also for my community and for my people. And to see people just disregard, and like, people talk about the media narrative saying, oh, well, they're just looking to criticize Biden. And, like, how about, just forget the politics for a second and see what's at stake. And I've like fortunately not been able to consume cable news these past few days. And I think I'm fortunate, because I think it would make me even more angry than I currently am. And there's like a deeper rage boiling inside of me, obviously. But for the U.S. media specifically, right, like the American media is elevating the exact people who were in charge of this mistake of this failure in the first place, right? Like any government official, any defense official, who, by the way, is now working for Raytheon, why are they on TV talking about this? There are plenty of other people who are also experts, who can talk about the situation at hand with authenticity, and it fails to do that, and instead just continues to give a platform to the same exact people who were harmful to the Afghan people in the first place. And that's like, it's obviously a lesson the mainstream media is unable and unwilling to learn. And this is the point that one of my fellow organizers made during one of our actions here in New York. He said, this has not been a failure. The occupation was not a failure. It succeeded in what it needed to do. There were clear winners, and the clear winners were Raytheon and Boeing. And their people on their board of directors and board of advisors are on CNN and MSNBC, getting free airtime to advocate for like continued conflict, continued war. No acknowledgement that like this policy of continued conflict and war, continuing to bomb them, has not worked. And what I call upon right now, like just humility. Know that the U.S. actually doesn't have the ability to bomb a place like Afghanistan or anywhere else in the world for that matter. It cannot bomb it into like stability or peace. That doesn't work. We have 20, if not 42 years of evidence for that.
I guess the question after the attack of this morning in Kabul, I mean, that was always one of the main issues, that the kind of fine line you've had to walk here, because, you know, everyone should be supporting the Afghanistan withdrawal. And when you're talking about helping human rights or helping the Afghanistan people, we should be talking about, you know, bringing in migrants into our communities and into our countries, people that want to get out of this situation. But the fear always was, though, that this was going to lead to some more sectarian violence, and it wasn't just going to be this completely peaceful, orderly transition. I guess given the events of today, like, what do you think the immediate future looks like? And do you think there's a chance that Afghanistan can get through this current chaotic period with any semblance of stability, or is this more of a sort of an ugly harbinger of more bad things to come in the future?
Well, I would say that today's attacks at the airport kind of show what we just discussed, which is, you know, like, you can continue to use force and violence and war and conflict and arms and drone strikes and CIA run strike squads with history of abuses. It does not bring peace. It does not defeat the Taliban. It does not defeat ISIS. It does not bring democracy. It does not bring women's rights. That's evidence of that. And like the point that we were advocating for earlier this week was, hey, I think the Biden administration should make this evacuation a little bit orderly and have a system. Instead, it's chaotic because the scene outside the airport is chaotic. Extend your perimeter. Like, in this very moment, yes, we want the U.S. to leave, obviously, because it's continuing to do harm. But in this very moment, we wanted to secure the airport, keep it operational, and allow for the evacuation of people who are afraid of repression and living under a authoritarian regime. And so I will always be an optimist and try to be hopeful. There's never like this so-called like final chapter for Afghanistan. You know, like, I think there's 38 million people who will continue to live there, and an overwhelming majority of them will fight for a better tomorrow. That's what our campaign is about. Hopefully that is done in a way that doesn't kill any more people. You know, like, I continue to advocate for people to bring change. And like, those people took to the streets last week and they carried the Afghan flag in an act of defiance, and they had to dodge bullets. And that is unfortunately the situation that is going to continue in a way. And it's hard for me to foresee and to also know to people that, like,
yeah, of course,
conflict and war is painful, and occupation is painful and is miserable. But also living under repression is also really awful, right? Like, violence and conflict can also look like somebody being dragged in the middle of the house at 3 a.m. quietly, not in front of Clarissa Ward's cameras on CNN. That also is violence. That's repression, and that will continue to harm the Afghan people. And unfortunately, the United States, the West, the international community has a hand in that, and it has a moral obligation to kind of alleviate the pain that it has helped cause over the past few decades.
I want to get into your op-ed for the Times a little bit before we wrap. And also, like, we really appreciate you even just taking the time to talk to us, because you've been so busy and so stretched thin that you're even doing this is like an honor, because you are doing work that the government really should be doing and NGOs should be doing, and it's like falling on regular people. I mean, you're important to us, but you mean, like, you aren't, like, you know, super politically powerful. But this is how far it's fallen. There's this responsibility, this moral obligation to do something. But your piece was about what the Biden administration should do, and there's a looming deadline to withdrawal on the 31st. And I know you've been talking to people to see if it can get extended, because there's a possibility, if they just have a firm hard stop at that's on the 31st, people get left behind. But the Biden administration said that they're not going to stay beyond that. What should people understand about that deadline, and what is your ideal outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to convey to folks who are listening in that I've spent, just like every other community member, I think, if not a majority of us, especially folks who are kind of plugged in, and like, unfortunately, I spent 20 years in DC, so I'm plugged in. I'm plugged into our community, our diaspora community. I'm plugged into also like, nobody really knows who I am, but like this week, all of a sudden, people do want to hear what's going on the ground. And so like, I'm trying to leverage that little tiny bit of power to be able to say, hey, like, this person right now is in a safe house in Kabul, and this person kind of needs to be rescued. And I've tried to do everything within my reach. Every person I've ever met, this is why I'm on every podcast. This is why I'm stretched in. This is why I'm doing every media opportunity, because it helps me, it gives me a platform to advocate for my friends. And it gives me a platform to advocate for people, because the Biden administration is failing to do that. I'm doing the job that the government is doing. And now they've put this like August 31st arbitrary deadline. And I say this as somebody who wants the occupation to end. I want the U.S. to disengage militarily from Afghanistan, because it can do no positive in that sense. I also just don't believe that, the U.S. should continue its empire around the world, especially not where I'm from. And I would say the idea, this arbitrary deadline is exactly that. It's set that, and I understand things are in flux. 12 Marines or 12 U.S. soldiers died today, and that makes things a little bit more complicated. But many more Afghans are at risk of repression, being lashed, and dying. And the ideal outcome is that the airport continues to be operational and secure for the next few weeks at least. To not rush this evacuation, to like allow people the chance, because what the 20-year occupation has done, it's just, it's what I call, it's touched so many Afghans, right? Like whether it's through aid money or the military, somebody's probably in some capacity fed some coalition soldier or an American soldier, and that person is under risk right now. We're talking about queer and trans Afghans. We're talking about journalists, women leaders, entrepreneurs. All these folks are deadly afraid and want to leave. And so the U.S. has kind of a moral obligation to allow for the evacuation of as many people who seek and desire to seek refuge and human dignity and safety elsewhere. I advocate for that to be in the U.S. If they want it to be elsewhere, that the U.S. should facilitate that as well. So that's the ideal outcome. And the second part of that is, that's for the folks who are able and capable and want to leave. The second part is like some type of humanitarian aid. It needs to be massive. There's like a sense of urgency behind it. We're looking at 30% of the population of Afghanistan that is under the risk of starvation, unfortunately. This is one of the biggest droughts in recent history, unfortunately. There is a pandemic, unfortunately. There is a repressive force at play that is currently telling folks, hey, music is banned and women for right now need to stay inside. There's no lack of pressing items, but I think those are the most two pressing things that in this very moment. On Thursday when I'm speaking with you guys, and that's kind of changing, but those are kind of the major points that I think are of importance as we move into the next few days and weeks.
Yeah. So I think we're all in agreement that continued U.S. military occupation is not the solution to this issue. I mean, you look back at the last 20 years of the war on terror, not just in Afghanistan, but Iraq, Syria, Libya, and all the different sort of geographical locations where this has taken place. It's just been an absolute fucking calamity for decades now. And violence like what we saw today is the result of that. And it's not, further occupation is not going to decrease the likelihood of such attacks. It's going to just increase it, as it always does. I think we're all on the same page about that, I imagine. I guess what I'm wondering is, for people that are listening and for people that want to, help, do whatever they can to try and help vulnerable people right now, how would you recommend that people do that, whether it's by talking to elected officials, voicing support for, bringing in Afghan refugees, fundraising? Like, is there any specific actions do you recommend people can take to try and do whatever we can to protect vulnerable people right now?
Yeah, I think there's a variety. There's no lack of need in this very moment, and there's a variety of action items that I would ask people to do. So our campaign is called Afghans for a Better Tomorrow. You can either Google that, or you can go to our Twitter or other social channels. One of the things we have is obviously we have this Move On petition that we are still pushing. I think it's over 105,000 people asking specifically for the U.S. to take in Afghan refugees. There's also a congressional call script that we link to that we're asking. We are basically hoping that as many people as possible continue to slam congressional lines, continue to advocate for the U.S. to take refugees in, continue to advocate for the airport to stay open, continue to advocate for some of the other things that I mentioned, such as humanitarian aid. These are of like vital importance, and that's what we ask folks to do. One immigration, one lane of like one of the immigration asks that we have is we're essentially being told that for Afghan refugees to be able to make it into the U.S., if they don't really qualify for some of the other ways of coming to the U.S., which is if you've either worked for the U.S. military or in some capacity worked for a U.S. funded agency or project, somebody who's just like a queer person and on his own who's at risk, who obviously deserves to like not live under the Taliban rule. We're being asked to do that through humanitarian parole, and also like immigration system is obviously designed to say no. It's not designed to vet people. It's designed to tell people and dissuade them from coming. And right now we're just in this like crisis moment where we're actually being told that, hey, like humanitarian parole is the route you should take. Now, what folks should know is that the humanitarian parole process is very bureaucratic. It also costs $575 per person. It also asks for a variety of resources. It asks for people. I like when I file a humanitarian parole application for one of my friends who I'm trying to get over here, it asks me to, give my social security number. It asks me to vouch for them financially. This is just a difficult task to complete, and it's $575 for every person. So what we are doing actually, and you can find us on the Afghans for a Better Tomorrow social channels, we were fundraising, and we're trying to fundraise as much money as possible. Like the cost for a family is $575 times like 4. Okay, so we're looking at over like $2,000 for somebody to be even considered to be able to come to the United States. And we're not even talking about what the actual evacuation looks like. Then I would also consider, if folks are interested in assisting Afghans in Afghanistan, there's a lot of IDPs, internally displaced people. There's an organization called Read to Lead, as well as WISE, WISE. Both these organizations are working on a very small scale right now because it's just difficult to operate as an NGO within the country. But those people are both assisting refugees who have been displaced, who have can't come to the capital. And I think the context for people being that there's a run on the banks, right? The banks are empty. They don't have any cash. There's no dollars. There's no currency. There's no fiat. And so people are slowly becoming a little bit more desperate, and they need access to basic things such as food and water. And those are kind of things people can assist in by donating money.
Awesome. We will do our best to link all of that in the show notes, and obviously follow Afghans Tomorrow at Afghans Tomorrow on Twitter, at 87films for Arash on Twitter. You guys are doing amazing work. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah. Thanks for elevating our voice, doing the right thing. And thanks for giving us a platform. And I hope everyone who's listening in at least does one of the things that I asked for. We'd be forever grateful. We find ourselves in a moment of crisis, unfortunately, but people can alleviate some pain. It just takes every person who's listening in today to make a call or make a donation or sign a petition. Hopefully, all three.
That's right.
Well, thanks again, Arash. We really appreciate you taking the time. We know you're all over the place right now, so we appreciate a lot that you can come on to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
All right,
thanks,
take
Arash.
care.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to The Insurgents. Please remember to subscribe over at theinsurgents.substack.com. Find the podcast on all your favorite podcast apps, and please remember to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It's very helpful and we appreciate it a lot. But please, again, don't mention Ken Klippenstein in the review. He is banned from the show. It's a lifetime ban, so please do not mention him in the review. And we'll be back later this week with more of the content that you know and love. Goodbye.